is both universal and unique. There are some aspects of grief. First of all, we're all going to experience it. So we're all going to experience grief at some point in our lives. There are some general things that people go through. I hesitate to call them stages because stages implies that they are fixed and they're in order. But there are, like I was just talking to a client right before we got on, whose daughter passed away. She was 4 months old. Her daughter was 4 months old, and it's very recent. That's going to be, and it was SIDS, so it was totally unexpected. That's going to be, you can pretty much imagine she's going to be in a state of shock. The first 6 months, 12 months, 2 years are going to be that shock stage. I call it the white knuckle stage, where you're just trying to hold on.
The two biggest questions from my perspective in life: why are we here and what happens after we die? Well, we examine near-death experiencers' accounts from all over the world, men and women, and their fascinating trips across the veil. We appreciate you joining us here on the channel, and don't forget, when you're done, if you wouldn't mind, to like, share, and subscribe, and leave us your comments.
Welcome to another edition of What's Death Got to Do With It here on the Near Death Network on YouTube. My name is Mark Lewis. We're glad you could join us. We talk about everything surrounding the near-death experience, spiritually transformative experiences, a lot of ancillary topics that are attached to the near-death experience, and also fueled by academicians and clinicians who are now edifying that consciousness does extend beyond our physical lives. And so that's why we're here, to do those types of shows. And joining me now, very happy to have him on our podcast today, is Brian Smith, Grief to Growth. And where are you today, Brian? Where do you reside?
I am in just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're probably a little colder than we are here in Arizona.
It's 31 degrees and it's supposed to start snowing tomorrow, and I don't know when it's going to end. So, yeah.
Well, when you guys laugh at us in July when it's 117, I guess it's our turn to chuckle a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not a big cold weather guy. Let's get into your background, because when I did about a month ago a podcast with Elizabeth Boisson with Helping Parents Heal, who I know you are affiliated with and do a lot of work with, as well as IONS. Give us a little thumbnail of your background. What thrust you into this space?
Well, I've been around for a long time, so I'll make it as quick as possible. But I started off, as a child, I was scared of death. I was terrified of death, of dying, because of religious background. So I'm also very much, my background's in engineering. So I'm the kind of person I like to take things apart, put them back together again, see how they work, stuff like that. So I did a lot of deconstruction of my faith in my 20s and 30s, 40s, et cetera, to figure out, okay, how does this all work? What does science got to say about it? What does religion have to say about it? Which one's right? Are they both right? Et cetera. And then 10 years ago, my daughter, Shayna, she was 15 years old. She passed away suddenly. So it was in 2015, as at the time she was 15 years old. So then I had to take all this stuff I learned about the afterlife. And it's like, okay, how do I apply this to my life now? Where did my daughter go? Can I have a relationship with her? What is the meaning of life? Or is it just random? All those types of questions. So I've been pursuing that aspect of it for 10 years. And then about 6 or 7 years, I guess, is when I started Grief to Growth, because I thought I had some things figured out, and I wanted to help other people understand, the nature of reality. What are we doing here? Where do we go? Those are the things that have always fascinated me. It's like I was the weird little kid that said, why am I on this planet? And what happens to when we're not here anymore? And I was about 8 when those questions started coming into my head.
Well, we would have been best friends then, because I always looked up and said, long before I even knew what a UFO or an extraterrestrial was, is that we seem like a culture dish. Seems like we are an experiment. I guess some could theorize gone bad or gone well, but we still retain sovereignty and autonomy. And like you, I pursued a more linear path, which was sportscasting. It doesn't get any more linear than that. You win, you lose. You have to deal with life's travails in whatever sport you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And but my heart was always in metaphysics, like you. Why am I here? And what happens after I go? What happens on the other side? And are those questions that have legitimate answers. So we kind of hit that nexus point together, and I'm appreciative of that. How soon did you start the grief counseling aspect of your business segment after Shayna's passing?
It was probably about 4 or 5 years, I would guess. I found helping parents heal a few months after Shayna passed. You mentioned Elizabeth Bassan, Mark Ireland. They co-founded Helping Parents Heal. Someone told me to reach out to Mark, so I reached out to Mark, and so I started working with Helping Parents Heal on their online site at the time. I ran that for a while, so we were on the Facebook. We would run the Facebook groups, and then I just said probably I guess six or so years ago is when I started Grief to Growth, where I was like, okay, I wanted to do a podcast. I've written a book, and I work with people one on one to help them navigate this thing that we call grief.
Well, we will put your information in the notes after we drop the podcast so people can get a hold of you if they need to. Tell me, have you had, or your wife, or both of you had STE with Shayna since her passing?
Yeah. Well, Shayna's come to us in all kinds of forms in terms of, dream visits, synchronicities, signs, stuff like that. So, it's interesting because of doing the work that I do, I talk to people who've had some really crazy things like, seeing apparitions or feeling, someone in their bed or stuff like that. Nothing that dramatic, but just undeniable, like I said, synchronicities and signs, things of that nature.
Well, and I think we did a panel to kick off this podcast with four experiencers and a doctor turned spiritual metaphysician, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. I don't
Mhm.
know if you've met him, but wonderful guy too. And we talked about signs significantly because, as you said, and I try to extol the people who are going through, trauma, loss of a spouse or a loved one. It's not always going to be, hey, Brian, or hey, Dad, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. You and Mom have a good night tonight. It's not, it could be. Now, it could still be a verbal telepathic communication, but typically it might be a pair of sneakers that she wore. Or my father, when he passed, when he transitioned, the song Butterflies Are Free was on by Elton John. So
Mm,
every time I see a butterfly, I think of my father. Now, is that a symbol or not? It is to me.
yeah.
So I think it's probably important to delineate to people. It may not come the way you're thinking it's going to come, but be apprised and be awake and be cognizant of what your environment's like.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone earlier today. I'm on a platform called Evolve Plus TV, and I was talking with someone there. We were talking about signs and synchronicities, and they were, a lot of people will say to me, "Well, why don't I get signs like you do? Why don't I get signs like she does? Why don't I get more signs? I want more signs." And what I've realized is the more signs people have, the more signs they want. First of all, we never get enough. But again, I'm one of the kind of people. I'm like, okay, why? Why are the signs seemingly so rare? Why are they so faint? And I'm like, I love Star Trek. In Star Trek, there was this thing called the Prime Directive. So if you came across a society, you couldn't do anything that significantly changed the course of that society. And I think our guides and our loved ones and on the other side, they're not here to direct our lives. They're not here to take over our lives. And I told this person, it's like if you're a parent and you have children and you never let your children do anything on their own, they're never going to even learn how to walk. They'll never learn how to talk if you always speak for them. So we are here to have our own experience. And so we do get these little nudges along the way. I call them Easter eggs. Shane and I used to love to play video games. So sometimes the programmers will put a little Easter egg in there. Or you could call it, if you love, I love the Matrix movies, it's like a glitch in the Matrix. So they're rare, and I think they're supposed to be rare because we're here to figure things out. We're not here to get all the answers from the back of the book.
I agree 100%. And I think we had John Davis on about a month ago, and his experience was leaving his body in a surgical procedure, going up in the Hall of Records, sitting down, going over the outline, replaying what the parameters of his life experience would be, but still having autonomy within
Mhm.
those parameters. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And it kind of coincides with what you're saying. We have the ability to reach out and ask for answers. And, but, we chose this direction
Mhm.
with their guidance. And so it's incumbent upon us to accept, what we go through in life and to be able to navigate. Like you said, I remember when my daughters first started learning how to drive, they didn't know how to put gas in their car. I said,
Yeah.
well, if I drop dead tomorrow, I'm going to show you how to do it. And then you won't have a problem if I'm not around.
Mhm.
You're right. You need to shepherd people into a position to make the choice within their own soul, to go deep in the recesses of their hearts and to be able to ascertain, am I wanting a sign or is that actually a sign? Like today, I found this little white feather
Oh,
in the
wow.
kitchen. Now, I don't know if it has any significance to you or to me. So I had to look it up and see what it actually could mean. And when I looked it up, it's as interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I find feathers. These are a couple on my desk. These are hawk feathers. So
Interesting.
yeah, so yeah, it does have significance to me.
Well, and so I think I was meant to bring this into this discussion to illustrate exactly what we're talking about. It
Hmm.
can be something as we would characterize as benign as that we would look past because we don't necessarily believe it's going to come that way, right? We think it's going to be trumpets and they're going to appear and they're going to be before our face, even in an apparition state, and say, go left, don't go right, or
Yeah,
sell the house. You need to sell the house.
yeah.
Um, I think collectively, this body of people that we work with and we talk with, not just clients, but also people who have experienced what you've gone through and what I'm attempting to do, we're all here as a team. We all have different strengths. We all can lift each other up. And not all of us are mechanical engineers. Both my brothers are really cognitive. I'm clueless. I got to pay a handyman, but my gifts are in a different area.
Hmm.
When people come to you as clients, what is it? It depends on the characteristics of who you're talking to. Are there some basics that you illustrate as it relates to grief? Because we're taking this in the holidays, and a lot of times this is a very melancholy time for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Are there regular primers that you would talk about, or is it all conditional to the individual or both?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing is that grief is both universal and unique. There are some aspects of grief. First of all, we're all going to experience it. So we're all going to experience grief at some point in our lives. There are some general things that the people go through. I hesitate to call them stages because stages implies that they are fixed and they're in order. But there are, like I was just talking to a client right before we got on, whose daughter passed away. She was 4 months old. Her daughter was 4 months old, and it's very recent. That's going to be, and it was SIDS, so it was totally unexpected. That's going to be, you can pretty much imagine she's going to be in a state of shock.
Mhm.
The first 6 months, 12 months, 2 years are going to be that shock stage. I call it the white knuckle stage, where you're just trying to hold on. And then you start kind of accepting that the grief, that this event's happened. And then we go through, we might go through sadness, we might go through guilt, we might go through anger. So I do look for some universal things with people when I start work with them, because I know, like, for example, guilt is going to block the healing process. If we feel like it's our fault, if we feel like I should feel bad because
Mhm.
it's my fault they're gone, I'm not going to be able to heal. So I start looking for that. I look for anger. If you're holding some unresolved anger towards someone, that can block the process. So I look for those things before we can start working on, okay, how do we now start to progress? And there's some general tools that I give people, that say these are things that everybody should do, whether you're in grief or not. So I will, I have 4 principles I go over with people. It's like, let's start doing these things as a practice, as a daily practice that helps just to build resilience. So there are some universals, but then everybody's different. Some people deal with, as I say, guilt. Some people deal with religious struggles. Some people are like, they might be materialists and don't believe that there's anything after this. So how do I help people come to some sense of, understanding of that? So that's where it gets customized from there.
Well, and unlike an academician who doesn't have real life experience, you speak to me about loss. You've experienced loss, a very poignant loss that I'm sure you're still integrating on a daily basis, even though I'm sure you've come to some kind of a point of resolution. To a degree, you would have to,
Yeah.
but it would probably affect you and your wife differently.
Mhm.
So I think that is an important catalyst for your ability to help lead me as a client through my pain, because you do know how I feel. You have experienced those emotions.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it was just talking with this client earlier, and a lot of my clients I work with, they are either seeing or have seen traditional therapists, in addition to seeing me. And it's always interesting because again, sometimes they'll see both, but they're like, with me, it's a different experience because we can talk from a mutual experience that we've shared. The other difference is, therapists are bound by certain things they're not supposed to do that I, as a life coach and a grief educator, can do. So I can get very real with people, that, again, a traditional trained therapist can't do. So there are differences. I'm not a mental health professional. I don't go into, well, what was your childhood like, and I don't diagnose and I don't really treat. But I'm more of a guide or a coach, someone that can say, yeah, I know what you're feeling and you're not insane. And, this will get better. I can tell you from experience that, right now you feel like, almost universally people say, I'm never going to be the person I was before. And I always say, you're right. Hopefully you're not going to be the same person you were before. One day you're going to end up being a stronger, more resilient person than you were before. But none of us goes back to who we were before. So that's something I can help people to kind of navigate. And again, that hold on, you're going to get there. When I was fortunate enough to find Helping Parents Heal, I found people that were 5, 6, 7 years into this experience, and I looked at them like, okay, there's a sign of hope. There's something that shows that I can make it. So I want to be that for people now.
Well, and we were visiting before we came on today. Carolyn Clapper, Next World Medium, who had her own NDE, sat before the council and agreed to come back and perform these tasks, sometimes grudgingly because she has so much second sight. I know she shared with you, I think, a moment about Shayna's sneakers. Was that it, or something that really pointed towards a connection there?
Well, Carolyn, she and I happen to be really good friends, and we met on Facebook. And she didn't really know how I was. It was kind of wild. I don't know if it was the sneakers you were talking about, but I walk every day, and I was posting my walks. And Carolyn goes, my daughter went to Carolyn's, like, you need to reach out to my dad. And Carolyn's like, I don't even know this guy. So she reached out and she said, I get the feeling that when you walk every day, that you're trying to catch up with Shayna. And I was
Uh,
like, that was exactly the thought that I had when I was walking. And then
Interesting.
she gave me like a 3-hour reading, which was just incredibly, the details were just off the charts, like things that were in Shayna's room, the books that were on her shelf, all kind the thought my wife had in the hospital the day that Shayna passed, that my wife had never even shared with me, that I had to verify with my wife.
Wow.
So yeah, she told me all kinds of things, that we know that, she's definitely the real deal.
Well, and those things that edify for you, and then you're able to go out and counsel and help others are so important, because a lot of people, as you said, are skeptical. A lot
Mhm.
of people, and I was an alleged journalist, albeit sports, they called us sports journalists, but
Mhm.
it was who, what, when, where, and why. We weren't to hypothesize, we weren't to editorialize, but that's all you see now. It's pretty much all
Yeah.
clickbait.
Yeah.
So we've gone away from that kind of a forum that I think was a lot more productive from the press, but that's for another day and another story. But when somebody like Carolyn can edify for you, and then you can pass those stories on to your clients, it must be very rewarding to be able to give them something to hold on to.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Carolyn, so we have she's a mutual friend now, but there's another woman I know on Facebook, and she's a professional skeptic. I mean, she worked for Snopes, and she's like, I'm always debunking things. And she came to me and she said, Brian, you believe in this stuff. You seem to be an intelligent person.
Mhm.
Why? And I said, because I've seen evidence. And she said, all right, tell me the best medium you know. I want to go to the best medium that you know, and I want to basically debunk this. So I said, okay, Carolyn Clapper. So I gave her Carolyn's name and stuff. She called, she booked with a different name, different phone number, used someone else's credit card. Carolyn told her all about her husband. And she came back to me. She was just blown up. She said, "There's no way." I set up all these blinds, right? She couldn't look me up. She didn't know my name. She didn't have my credit card number. She had none of that stuff. They actually become like really good friends now. But and then she said, "No, well, tell me more." So I started sending her books to read, and she came back and she goes, "Why didn't I know any of this stuff existed?" And I said, "This is the prevailing paradigm that we live in, that people just assume that these things can't be true." And I say a true skeptic or a true scientific person doesn't say something's impossible; they investigate it.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm trying to tell people. It's like, I don't just believe things because I want to believe them. And I don't like the word belief. I don't really like the word faith that much, because I tell people that I've come to conclusions. Just like any good scientist will look at the data, and that doesn't mean I know exactly how this works, but it's the most reasonable hypothesis. And that's what I present to people. This is the most reasonable hypothesis based upon the data that we have.
Well, and I think it's important, again, to go back to your collegiate education, which is more linear and engineering, for
Mhm.
someone to come out of that space and for me to come out of journalism and just say, it's tantamount to heresy for me to just say, oh yeah, it's all real, until I do my due diligence, I research, I look at the collective body of evidence. Like
Mhm.
when you look at near-death experiences culturally around the world, typically the archetype that presents is based on what you grew up with. So Christianity here, Buddha, maybe it's a deity in an Aboriginal deity in New Zealand,
Mhm.
that they were more raised in that kind of a rural environment, because I've read those experiences too. And that makes
Right.
sense to me,
Right.
because when you're making the leap from this 3D existence uh, to there, to over the veil, which is the reality, it's jarring. So the best way to cushion that blow is to give somebody that you're familiar with, and it doesn't have to be religious. It could also be relative, in oftentimes it is, or both. So
Mhm.
to soften the blow of re-entry into reality, because this is a reality, we know that, but it's
Mhm.
our reality right now. We need to redefine what death is. We need to help people, especially those who are, I would say, very religious, and they think it's heresy for them to question when they're going to go, or what happens after they go, or not just be open. You don't
Mhm.
have to buy it. Like you said, do the Snopes research. She does it. She goes with the double blind, triple blind, and
Yeah.
Carolyn nails it. How
Yeah.
does that happen? How do you explain it away? Well, the way to explain it away is that consciousness is, so the field of consciousness is, and some who are adept like her, and she would say we all have that ability, but
Yeah.
we can't still our minds enough while we're scrolling on our freaking phones and looking at the internet 24 hours a day and looking at news headlines and getting upset about life. You got to still yourself. I think especially I'm really passionate about the youth, because they grew up with this scrolling mentality, and it's vignettes, and it's not necessarily something in depth, and it's not a good book like 400 or 500 pages. You get enthralled by it, you read it. So it's more surface stuff. And I think a lot of maybe what you even see in your practice is there's really no attachment, especially if there's familial issues, a
Mhm.
single parent home, there's not a lot of money. So I think if we can help redefine death as an extension of consciousness, and not the end of consciousness, then maybe it can soften that blow.
Yeah, I think, for me, one of the biggest problems in the world is that we have forgotten who we are. And again, being of a scientific mindset, science has just been so successful over the last 200, 100, 200, 300 years, that people have said, well, science, since it built the iPhone and the internet, science can tell us everything. So I think it was Time Magazine in the 70s said, is God dead? Because people said, well, we don't need God to explain anything to us anymore. We can explain everything through material science. What I find fascinating is we're coming back around to realizing that consciousness is fundamental, like Max Planck said over 100 years ago, to finding out that the observer effect is very real. And I was just listening to a scientist talk this morning. Scientists say, well, if we can reproduce it in the lab under the exact same conditions, then we'll believe it's real. And the guy goes, the conditions are never exactly the same. You
Yeah.
might say that these certain things were irrelevant, different time, different air pressure, different observers, and now we know the observer can impact the experiment. So I kind of laugh when I think about this mindset that we've come to everything's material, and now we're going back to what our ancestors have known for thousands of years, that everything is consciousness.
Right. And it may not be put in that lexicon. The verbiage might be different because the way that they articulated it,
Yeah,
years ago may be different than the way we do. But now, as you said, some of quantum physics is really edifying consciousness, extending beyond the death of physical life as we know it,
yeah,
because the whole quantum field, right? Multiple fields simultaneously existing at the same time have been proven and are still being proven.
hmm
And one of the guys I find fascinating is Riz Verk. I don't know if you know him, but he's written a book called The Simulation Hypothesis. And
oh,
he's kind of he was a techie initially, but he's also studied ancient religions. And a lot of these things correspond. And his fascination is just what you said earlier about Schrodinger's example, the observer effect. So
hmm
if you observe something and I do, it's likely not going to be 100% the same, right?
yeah,
I'll have some kind of predisposition towards what I bring into my senses. You'll do the same thing, and we may come to different conclusions. So that malleability of spirit and consciousness is really kind of fundamental to our existence.
yeah. And I think it's really interesting because it's funny you mentioned simulation theory, because now we're talking about holographic universes and simulation, and are we living in a simulation, et cetera. And people go like, "Oh, this is it. We figured it out. We're living in a computer program." I'm like, "No, that's just the latest analogy we're using. That's
Right,
based on the technology we have today." Plato wrote, the cave, however many hundreds or thousands of years ago. It was the same thing. They didn't have computers at the time, but he wrote about these beings living in caves where they could only see the shadows on the wall, which sounds to me a lot like a simulation. So,
right.
I'm saying this knowledge that we think we've just come to is ancient. We're just putting in a different language, and we think, oh well, it must be a computer. I'd say it's not a computer. I'm almost certain it's not a computer, but that's our latest model for it. In 100 years, people will be laughing at us for thinking it was a computer.
I agree 100%. And I think that my question would be, and he's going to come on for a podcast, based on his hypothesis. Well, who's running the simulation then?
Right.
Who's at the control? So now it's conjecture again, right? Is that God? Is that deity? Is it the Council of Nine? Is it the Galactic Council that's now bringing this comet into our space? All those things are interesting and
Mhm.
esoteric, but how does that help you or me manage grief and the loss of a son or a daughter or a loved one in your paradigm and what you do? We have to stay focused on what we know to be true. And you come up with a primer to help me, if I'm a client,
Mhm.
deal with the passing of my wife. I have three close male friends who've lost their wives,
Mm.
and I advocate for them to the degree that I look for, and I will mention you. I hadn't even thought of them coming to you because they're so much in their own heads. They can't separate themselves from how they're acting to be able to kind of pull themselves out of the morass of depression. They're so deep in the well, they're covered with moss. They try to climb the well and they fall back down. They try
Yeah.
and fall back down.
Yeah.
So for people like that, and you don't know the idiosyncrasies of these different dilemmas, and people who are reintegrating after a near death experience, incredibly hard. A
Yeah.
lot of them takes them 10, 15, 20 years to even talk about it.
Right.
How do you structure? Do you have your initial clients come in and you and I visit, and I tell you, here's what's bothering me, and then you put together a template?
Yeah, it's not really so much a template because it's everybody's unique and different. So what I do is I meet with someone first time, we have a discovery call. I kind of figure out what their issues are, and then we will have an hour long meeting and we'll talk about it. And so, like I said, for some people, it might be they've got a religious blockage. For some people, they might be dealing with anger. They might be dealing with guilt. So we work on those issues before we get into the nitty gritty, I call it, getting into, I have a 4-step system called GEMS. It's gratitude, it's exercise, it's mindfulness and meditation, and it's self-care. So I help people build, I'm like, it's a daily practice that I think everybody should be doing. So mine looks one way. I help my clients, I help them build that framework. What does your gratitude practice look like? What is your exercise? Is it walking? Is it lifting weights? Is it, gardening, whatever it is? How are you doing mindfulness so that you can keep this mindset? And then also it's really important to do self-care. So I work with people on that level. And then, in terms of everything is really a matter of perspective. I mean, literally everything. It's what meaning we give to it. How do I choose to look at this? So when it comes to, like, for example, losing a person, or let's start. That's the big thing. Let's start with something small. I got fired for my job when my daughter was 9 months old. Okay, disaster, right? My wife is a stay-at-home mother. My daughter is 9 months old. I'm the single, breadwinner in the house. Disaster, total. Nothing worse could happen. But I ended up taking another job because I was unemployed. There was a job I had been looking at. It was a 100% commission job that I would have never taken, but I took it. Sales job turned out to be a great thing. So that's a matter of perspective. Once I got some distance, I could see how something good came out of that thing that's bad. When we expand that out and we start to say, getting back to our simulation theory, or the thing is, this isn't the ultimate reality. What if there's another level beyond this? We don't know who's controlling it. We don't know exactly what's there, but there's just another level, a level that we came from that's more real than this level is. Because some people believe there's nested reality, and I think there probably is. So that gets me at least a little bit removed from this perspective. So I can say maybe my daughter's passing wasn't the worst thing that could ever have happened. Maybe something good will come out of that in this lifetime. And if I know that I'm going to see her again, which I absolutely believe, that removes another layer of tragedy from it. So now I don't see it as simply a tragedy. I see maybe there's some meaning to it. So we can at least start to get curious about things that happen.
No, I think that's very important, especially for people processing loss. I admire you, and I don't know if you know Barbara Bartolome, but she has the IONS group in Santa Barbara. She's a sweet gal, one of the first people I met when I got
Mhm.
into space several years ago. And
Mhm.
we were talking about, the loss of a child. She goes, I wouldn't have any problem, if one of my children passed, because I've had 2 NDEs. I know where they're going. I know they'll be fine. I know it cerebrally. I know it intellectually, but I have 2 daughters. I'd be devastated. So I think it's, I don't sit where you sit. So if I sat where you sat, knowing what I know, I think I could help be more of a guide for my wife, who would have significant problems adjusting to this. Um, but how do you, I guess, for people who can't integrate that loss, and you said grief is, there's no time clock, right?
Mhm.
We all process it differently. When do you start to push a client a little bit more, or do you ever?
Yeah, well, I don't know Barbara, so this is not personal to her.
Mm,
Um, but there's one thing to know something intellectually, there's another thing to have a lived experience. And when Shayna passed away, I thought, okay, I've got all this knowledge. I know Shayna's okay. And I remember hearing Dr. Mary Neal talk about her near-death experience. She got to see the other side. She met Jesus. She got to see the way that everything ripples out to like the 38th level, I think is the way she put it. And everything's in order. And then she was told, your son's going to pass away in like about 10 years.
right, and that skiing
And when her
accident. Yeah.
son passed away, she experienced grief. And that was actually very freeing for me, because I was like, if she can experience grief, then I should be able, it's okay for me to experience grief. Another thing, I was listening to Donald Hoffman speak the other day, and he's just big on this, like, kind of a simulation theory thing. And he's talking about how everything is just basically like a dashboard, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I love what he said. He goes, and by the way, I don't believe anything I just said. He goes, because I am still so attached to this avatar that I don't want to die. I still identify with this avatar. So what I gently try to tell my clients is, It's okay to feel the grief. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay to feel guilt. It's okay to feel frustration, loneliness, all those human emotions. That's what we're here to feel. So we don't get to bypass it just because we have a higher knowledge. It helps to soften it, as the Bible says, and I'm a former Christian, and so I talk about the Bible a lot. But the Bible says we don't grieve like those who have no hope, but it doesn't say we don't grieve. So we still grieve, but we grieve maybe a little bit lighter.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it, because you can, again, I go back to John Davis's story with his guys, and
Mhm.
I said, well, why would you come down and experience all the hell that's going on this planet now?
Mhm.
Or why would any of us come down, right? That's speaking for the audience.
Right.
And he says, well, I can tell you how to ride a bike, but until you get on a bike and you balance it and you have to pedal it and you have to maintain balance, you don't really experience it, right? You can know, like you said, theoretically, the simulation is the newest, latest craze for how this life on this planet is portrayed.
Mhm.
But until you're playing the character and going through the machinations of life and having to deal with all of these, and I don't know how you feel, but I was the same way. I lost my job in television here after 15 years at the station I was at on one night, and they just told me to leave the station.
Hmm.
And I was devastated. I didn't know, what am I going to do? But like
Mhm.
you, I was approached by a local Native American casino to host a talk show out of one of their lounges with all the relationships that I had accrued over time in the
Yeah.
sports industry. So
Right.
it wound up being a great thing. I only worked one day a week. I made more money. I was in a bar at a casino. So how is that a bad thing?
Right.
I guess it's like my old man used to always say, adversity builds character,
Mhm.
right? We can all, if we have a good day, and Shane is now playing it, in the WNBA or what, or she's just in your life and you guys are going through, you wouldn't know any difference because of the perspective. It's all about the perspective that you see it, the lens that you see something through. So I
Yeah.
would imagine a lot of what you do is to ascertain, well, who am I? What do I believe? And then
Right.
be able to work with your framework within that for your clients.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there's this, as I was talking, there's this Buddhist idea of non-attachment, which most people misunderstand, but let's just go with the idea that most people think of it as, which means basically, I don't care what happens. That's not what the Buddhists mean by it, but that's what people think. And I'm like, if you were non-attached to anything, you would be a robot. You would be less than human, not more than human. That's not what we're here to do. We're not here to not care about our loved ones. Like if your daughter were to pass away or your wife were to pass away, someone would say, if I'm not attached, then I would just say, well, that's okay because I know where they are. And I actually worked with a couple where one of the people was hyper religious, and that's what they were saying after their granddaughter was murdered. And I'm like, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to feel the feelings and to have the experiences. So I try to help people balance. I had a client, I love the analogy she used. It's kind of like, if you ever scuba dive, you want to be neutral buoyant, so you want to be able to go up and down easily when you're diving. So you will inflate your bladder or put on weights to kind of get your air bladder to get you that neutral buoyancy. So when we are in the human body and we're getting too high and too up in that, that we need to come down and be human again. But when we get too down in the muck, we need to move ourselves up a little bit. And being human is that navigating or negotiating that divinity and the humanity at the same time.
I agree 100%. And I think that's analogous to the life review and the near death experience, because it's not a punitive thing. It's
Right.
basically showing you every interaction you've ever had collectively in your sentient life with all life, animal, mineral, and otherwise. And Jeff Jansen's written a great book on My Life's Ripple Effect, where one gentleman actually threw a gum wrapper out of his car. It seems very benign, into a river. But then in his life review, he was shown that the river got plugged up.
Hmm.
So incrementally, he contributed to nature eroding based on his one selfless act, which if you went back to your mindfulness, just say, I just throw it on my floor in the car and then I'll clean it when I vacuum my car or whatever.
Mhm.
If it, just like Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll says, and I try to do this, and when I do it, I have a great day. How can I serve? Wake up
Yeah.
today. How can
Yeah.
I serve? Is it a
Yeah.
smile? Is it helping a customer? I'm retired. I work at Home Depot and we're in the Christmas tree lot. It's beautiful to see these little kids come in. They're so joyful. You
Yeah.
know, they're so happy about, they don't have any cares. And to be able to interact with that joy and acknowledge it, I would imagine from your seat as a practitioner, there's a lot of things to be grateful for. And gratitude is one of your pillars. I believe gratitude is the foremost to be able to have this interview with you. I'm very grateful for it, to be able to help someone who might need whatever we talk about today. What a great feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, I always keep it real with people. It's like when I first heard about gratitude, I was like, first of all, again, engineer, how does that work? How is that going to change my life? Is that going to make anything different? And then, well, my daughter just passed away, so what do have I got to be grateful for? Because the thing about the human condition is our brains are evolved to tell us what's wrong. Our brains are evolved to keep us safe, to look out for danger. So we're constantly scanning for what's wrong. We have to rewire our brains, which we can, to look for what's right. So as you said, there's always something to be grateful for. But when you first start talking to people about this, they're like, "Well, you don't understand. I'm broke. I don't have any money, and I'm sick." But I tell people, let's start with something small. I'm sitting in a room with lights. I have power. I have internet. It's 32 degrees outside, but it's 70 degrees in my house. I have heat. I have clean running water. There's so many things I can think of to be grateful for. And once we start practicing that, then our brains start to look for things to be grateful for, and that lifts our mood just naturally. And we don't even have to start practicing anymore. So again, it goes back to that thing. It's all about perspective. It's all about perception. So I could tell you right now that are 10 things that are terrible in my life, and I can tell you 10 things that are great in my life. And I get to choose which ones of those I focus on.
Well, and I would imagine for you, and you've probably already come to this conclusion, but without the passing of your daughter, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today. You wouldn't be a practitioner. You wouldn't be helping me in this audience and your clients and people, or maybe you would have. I don't know. Maybe you would have still
Absolutely
got
not.
into this line of work. But
Absolutely not.
the blessing and the gratefulness is that I believe when you and Shayna and your wife and your cadre of people all were sitting around planning how this was going to work out, you never had any reservations because you knew it would be challenging. And that's what we get to. Some people can't get to that level and say, really, we plan out the minutia? Well, I don't necessarily believe we plan out the minutia. I believe we have the arc, the story arc.
Yeah.
So in Brian Smith's outline, here's what the story arc is. You can accept it or deny it, but once you sign off, then the veil comes down. Then you're down here to enact it. You say, why would I ever choose this? Why would I choose this despair? Well, obviously your ability to now help all of us and collectively so many people. What a great mission to be on.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard the idea that it's a Buddhist idea that it's a blessing to be born in a human body, to have a human life, and there's sometimes you heard near death experiences you would say there's a line to get into Earth, and people go, why would there be a line to get into Earth? Earth is nothing but hell. There's nothing but terrible things going on here, but that's not true. That's what we choose to focus
Right.
on. There's also the sunset. There's the sunrise. There are flowers, there's your dog, there's all kinds of beautiful stuff going on here also. So we get to have this experience. We get to have this, and I never thought I would say that. And it's really wild that I only say that after my daughter passed away, that I came to this understanding that you can't really appreciate the beauty without having some of the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was working with someone, I was helping her build her Substack, and so we were working on her like introduction page, and I said, let's do a little exercise to help your clients with gratitude. So have them sit and think of 3 things they're grateful for, like I've got food, I've got water, I've got whatever. She goes, well, I don't want to tell them to think about the fact they have food, because then they're going to think about somebody that doesn't have food, and that might trigger their trauma or activate their trauma. And I said, okay, there's no way for me to tell you to be grateful for something unless you can imagine not having it. You can't be grateful for something unless you can imagine at least the possibility of not having it. And that's just, I don't know if that's part of being human or just part of existing, but it's just a fact, right? If I'm going to be grateful for having heat, I'm probably going to be thinking about the fact there's a possibility I might not have heat.
Right. No, I think that's very important to point out, just in all aspects of life. And so many of these concepts are not earth shattering and they're not groundbreaking. But most people, it's just like analogous to sports. We'll go back to sports. If I'm your coach and I have you repetitively doing the 40-yard dash because that explosiveness helps you separate in your route and become a more prolific receiver and ultimately helps the team do better,
Hmm.
then that's why we're doing it. But it's arduous when you're going through it. I don't want to run another sprint. I don't have anything left in me.
Right.
Well, this is a fourth quarter, gentlemen. There's 2 minutes to go in the game.
Yeah.
You're not going to have anything to go. But this repetitiveness and knowing that you can do it when you're exhausted is exactly what you're talking about. And it is based on perspective. Want to leave our viewers with what we always do, and typically from the experiencers, it's the wisdom that they glean that they can utilize, maybe 2 or 3 points
Hmm.
from your position as a clinician who sits with a lot of individuals going through a lot of heavy topics. Um, and even though this is airing in the holidays, it's evergreen, so people would
Yeah.
be watching it. What are some of the concepts in your discipline that they could utilize and get? Is it going back to the 4 pillars? Is it going back to the degree that you can manage those on a daily basis, that they will have a better existence?
Yeah, I did talk about the four pillars. I call it gems. So those are the practices. But what the goal is to get to this mindset where it says kind of like the buoyancy thing. It's like I am here to be fully human, but also to understand that I am always more than that as well. So I'm always reaching up. I love you talked about the team. I am a part of a team. I am not here alone. I'm here as part of to serve the collective, cells in the body, whatever you want to use. Getting out of your own way and thinking that your life is the most important thing ever, and that the tragedy that happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened. There is intelligence behind all this. There is love behind all this. The universe does care about you, and you're never alone. So we go through these experiences, and then we get to go home. So that's the way I look at it.
Well, that's very well put. And I will just close with an anecdote that I was told by a friend of mine who does angel readings. And she was a naturopathic CEO for many years. And so
Mhm.
she was in the linear space like you were, like I was, like we all were. And I was talking to her because she does these readings and saying, this was 4 or 5 years ago when we came up with the idea for the television pilot, Alive Again, essentially covering these same topics.
Mhm.
I said, "Well, can you have your people help us out?" And she just starts laughing. And I said, "Well, why are you laughing?" She said, "Well, they're telling me you never ask. You don't
Mhm.
ask for help."
Mhm.
Which I don't. I'm kind of a contrarian that way. I always have to try to eke it out on my own. But as I grow older and wiser, I would seek someone else's counsel of who I would respect. And whether it's a divine guide or we do all have guides. I know my guides are exhausted from following me around for my entire life. But that's another thing, right? We can ask.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, we think we need permission to ask.
Yeah, I have a client, her son is in spirit now, and he came to her, he said, "You know what? You have to ask." And she this is according to him, "And you have to ask out loud." There's something about the vibrational aspect of asking out loud. But again, back to that prime director thing, our guides are not here to live our lives for us.
Right.
So if we go through life and we say, "I don't believe you exist," or "Get away from me, I got this," they're gonna stand back and they're gonna be hands off. So why would you do that to yourself? Reach out, ask for help. even if it's your higher self. There's an aspect of you. You're not fully in this body. You're not fully incarnated. So if you don't feel like reaching out to another being, reach out to your higher self.
Oh, I agree 100%. And that's really prayerfulness, meditative
Yeah,
disciplines. Um, and I think every religion worldwide has that as a catalyst. Then men got involved, and power got involved, and the state got involved, and clinicians got involved. And
yeah,
they tore the garment over the actual real estate that they would monetize, for want of a better word.
exactly.
I really appreciate your time, Brian, and I appreciate the fact that you're doing what you're doing despite having gone what you've gone through. Because anyone would say, I could see where you take a seat on the sidelines. I could see where you say, I don't want to participate anymore. But obviously, you had the resilience, and you've got that beautiful daughter right behind you there that we've been watching the whole time. And I love her smile. I can tell. To me, it's animated. I think I've seen some movement back there, but
Yeah.
maybe it's just me. But how can people get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you?
You can reach me on my Substack, which is grief numeral 2 growth.substack.com. You can sign up for my Substack newsletter there and communicate with me there, or my website if you want to find out more about my services. So it's grief2growth.com, grief numeral 2 growth.com. I'll be happy to talk to anybody. I offer free 30-minute consultation if anybody wants to reach out to me.
Well, we really appreciate your counsel and your wiseness, and you're willing to be able to come on here on short notice. And I look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, great to meet you.